began with a whisper. An anonymous Twitter account with fewer than 200 followers posted a screenshot of an email supposedly written by Karoline Leavitt. The subject line read, "We need to control how much truth gets out." It was vague, unverified, and out of character. But it didn't matter because within an hour, Joy Behar held the printed email in her hand on the View. "I'm just saying," she smirked, waving the page for the camera, "if this is real, and I'm not saying it is, it shows who she really is." The audience gasped. Who could resist a young conservative press secretary accused of orchestrating media manipulation from inside the White House? That was headline gold. Karoline's phone exploded within minutes. Texts from reporters, alerts from staff, even allies demanded answers. Her communications director, Emma, burst into her office. "We're getting crushed. The View ran it like it was gospel." Karoline didn't move. She stared at the screen, watching Joy's grin freeze frame between two co-hosts, snickering. The caption below read, "Leavitt, controlling the truth." Karoline reached across her desk and picked up her own printed copy of the email. She'd already seen it, and she knew something no one else did. It was real, but it wasn't hers. At least not the way they thought. "I want a call scheduled," Karoline said. Emma blinked. "With who?" Karoline looked up, calm but sharp. "With The View. Tell them I'll come on live tomorrow." Emma's eyes widened. "You're going into the trap?" Karoline nodded. "No, I'm bringing the match." Back in the ABC studio, Joy was celebrating. "She won't show," she told producers. "She'll hide behind some staff statement." But the next morning, as the camera crews set up for the segment, one of the stage managers walked over to the host table with a clipboard. She confirmed, "Karoline's coming, in person, live, unfiltered." Joy looked up, startled. "Wait, what?" Too late. The trap had been set, but they hadn't counted on Karoline walking into it with the entire email and the real story. Karoline Leavitt didn't dress to blend in that morning. She wore a sharp navy blue blazer with a subtle silver cross pinned at the collar, an unmistakable symbol of who she was and what she stood for. No talking points, no entourage, just her and a leather folder tucked tightly beneath her arm as she stepped into the ABC building. Producers glanced up in quiet disbelief. She wasn't flustered, she wasn't defensive, she was composed. And early backstage, Joy Behar was getting final makeup touch-ups, laughing with one of the co-hosts, when the stage manager leaned in and whispered, "Karoline's in the green room." The air shifted. "She actually showed up?" Joy muttered. The producer nodded. "And she brought something, a folder." Joy's smirk flickered. Meanwhile, in the green room, Karoline stood at the mirror, adjusting her blazer. Emma texted her from the West Wing. "You sure about this?" Karoline replied. She printed the headline, "I'm bringing the full page." At exactly 11 a.m., the cameras rolled. The View's theme music played over cheerful graphics. Joy's voice opened the segment with practiced charm. "Today, we're joined by the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, and apparently the author of a very interesting leaked email." Laughter. Karoline entered the stage to polite applause, mostly from the audience's conservative corner. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She simply walked to her seat, placed the folder neatly on the table, and met Joy's eyes without blinking. "Thank you for having me." Joy leaned forward, theatrical. "You're very brave, Karoline. Most people wouldn't show their face after an email like that." Karoline's voice was calm. "That's because most people don't want the truth." Read out loud. Joy laughed, feigning confusion. "Oh, so it's not real?" Karoline opened the folder slowly, like turning pages in court. "It's very real, which is why I'm here to read the entire thing, not the cropped version you flashed for ratings." A shift ran through the audience. Joy straightened. "We're live, you know." Karoline smiled faintly. "Exactly." And with that, she pulled out the email, and the trap began to spring in reverse. Karoline placed the printed email on the table with deliberate care, as if preparing evidence in front of a jury. The audience leaned in. Even Joy Behar's smirk had frozen just enough to notice. "You read the subject line," Karoline began, her tone firm but controlled. You read the opening paragraph, but you stopped there because the next 5 paragraphs didn't fit your narrative. Joy crossed her arms. We showed what mattered. Karoline didn't blink. No, Joy. You showed what you wanted to matter. She lifted the first page. This email was sent during a private strategy session where I raised concerns about how the media, not the administration, was shaping public truth. This line, she pointed, "We need to control how much truth gets out," was a question I was quoting, not a directive. And here's the sentence right after the one you cropped. She read aloud. If the press keeps manipulating facts, how do we make sure Americans get the truth unfiltered? The studio quieted. The tone had changed. Viewers watching at home suddenly realized they hadn't been told the whole story. Karoline flipped the page. And then I wrote this. We must ensure transparency. Americans don't need spin, they need facts. Even if the truth is uncomfortable, we owe it to them. Silence. Even the co-hosts exchanged glances. Joy tried to recover. Well, maybe you should have been clearer in your language. Karoline cut in. Or maybe you should have read past the first sentence before accusing me on national television. The audience gasped. One woman in the back clapped once before stopping herself. Karoline leaned forward. You didn't expose a scandal. You exposed a strategy you didn't like, one rooted in truth and transparency. And rather than invite me to explain it, you tried to frame it for entertainment. Joy looked to her producers off camera, clearly unsettled. Karoline held up the final page. This email isn't a confession. It's a call for accountability, one that your team cut, edited, and packaged like clickbait. But since we're live, I figured I'd give your audience what you wouldn't. For a moment, the only sound was paper rustling in her hand. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She just read, and that was louder than anything else in the room. For the first time in years, the View studio felt unprepared, not because Karoline Leavitt shouted, not because she made dramatic gestures, but because she didn't. She simply read, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, dismantling the accusation not with emotion, but with evidence. Joy Behar shifted in her seat. Well, even if you wrote all that, don't you think the phrasing was questionable? Why use a sentence like that if you knew it could be misunderstood? Karoline turned to her, calm, because I assumed the people reading it would care about context. Clearly, I was wrong. A few audience members laughed nervously. The moment didn't feel like daytime TV anymore. It felt like court. And Karoline wasn't just defending herself. She was prosecuting the spin. One of the co-hosts chimed in, trying to soften the blow. You have to admit, Karoline, the timing of the leak was suspicious. It made you look like a manipulator. Karoline finished for her. That's the game. Leak half a sentence, imply intent, go viral. But the truth is never as exciting as the smear, is it? The camera zoomed in just enough to capture Joy's tight jaw. Karoline reached back into her folder. Since we're here, I also brought emails from the same thread. Here's one where I suggest inviting CNN to the next press conference. Another where I push for full release of economic stats without edits. You want to talk about transparency? Let's talk. Joy blinked. You planned this. Karoline didn't smile. No, you planned this. I just came with the whole story. The audience clapped. Not everyone, but enough for the mics to catch it. A few in the front row leaned forward, eyes wide, phones out. Backstage, a producer whispered to the director, "We're losing the room." But it was more than that. Karoline wasn't just winning, she was flipping the entire dynamic. The hosts, once in control, now looked reactive, defensive. And Karoline? She hadn't even raised her voice. She had just shown up. By the halfway point of the segment, Joy Behar's confidence had noticeably cracked. Her usual rhythm, sarcasm, punchlines, easy applause, had vanished. What was left was a studio that didn't know how to react. Karoline sat tall, her tone unwavering. You say I manipulate truth, but I'm sitting here on your stage, reading my words out loud. You tried to make them scandalous, but all I see is transparency. Joy scoffed. Come on, Karoline. You can't seriously believe this email doesn't at least look bad. Karoline nodded slowly. It looks bad when you cut it in half, just like... A courtroom transcript can be twisted if you only read the prosecution. That's not journalism, that's a performance. The live audience shifted uncomfortably. Some clapped, others looked to Joy for a response. But Joy wasn't quick to answer this time. She grabbed her mug, took a slow sip, and leaned back. One of the younger co-hosts jumped in, trying to salvage balance. So, what do you want us to take away from this, Karoline? That we were wrong. Karoline turned, meeting her eyes gently but firmly. No. I want your audience to understand what actually happened. I don't need an apology. I just want truth to stop being treated like a political weapon. She paused, then added, You say I'm dangerous because I speak for Trump, but I didn't bring him today. I brought receipts, and that seems to scare you more than anything he could tweet. That line hit hard. Backstage, producers were frantically checking comment feeds. Viewers weren't tuning out. They were tuning in. One trending post read, Karoline's not backing down. She's reading the whole email line by line. No drama, just fire. Another. Behar set the trap, but Karoline brought the flashlight. Joy leaned forward again, slower this time, her eyes narrow, voice controlled. Well, if this is your strategy, it's working. Karoline didn't flinch. It's not a strategy. It's just the truth, finally given a mic. And in that moment, the most unexpected thing happened. The studio went quiet. Not because Karoline had silenced them, but because they'd finally started hearing her. 10 minutes before the end of the segment, The View's producers were sweating. The comment section was out of control. Live feedback poured in faster than the moderation team could manage. But unlike past political clashes, this wasn't just tribal cheering. It was different, balanced, curious, even shocked. I don't even like Karoline Leavitt, but she's eating them alive with their own email. Joy looks like she's sitting in a courtroom, not a talk show. Karoline's too calm for them to handle. Back on stage, the atmosphere was tense. Not hostile, but tense, like everyone was waiting for something to break. Karoline leaned back in her chair and placed the entire email chain, multiple pages, on the table between her and Joy. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just asking you to stop editing people into villains. Joy's voice was tight. You do that every day for Trump. Karoline's response was immediate. I defend policy, I clarify facts. But I've never taken someone's words, chopped them in half, and waved them around for applause. That's not public service. That's theater. A young woman in the front row, clearly a progressive, nodded slowly, whispering to her friend. She's actually right about that. Joy tried one last angle. But isn't it fair for us to question someone in power? Karoline nodded. Absolutely. Question me. Challenge me. I expect that. What I don't expect is for you to build your entire argument on a sentence you refuse to finish. She flipped the final page of the email and highlighted one last quote. If we fail to speak clearly, we risk losing the public's trust. Let's commit to honest communication, even when it's uncomfortable. The audience clapped. Not a cheer, not a standing ovation, just applause. Thoughtful, respectful. One of the co-hosts looked to Joy, then down at the papers on the table. Why didn't we show this part? Joy didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was sitting in front of them, clear as day, because it didn't suit the story they wanted to tell. But Karoline? She came to tell the whole one. And now, for the first time in the entire segment, the view no longer belonged to the hosts. It belonged to the guest. Karoline could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't just about the email anymore. It was about credibility, about the audience's ability to discern what was real from what was designed. She looked straight into the camera, not at Joy, not at the co-hosts, but directly into the living rooms of millions watching. You don't have to like me. You don't have to agree with me. But if you believe in truth, you should be angry about how this was handled. Backstage, one of the social media interns whispered, "We're trending. Another confirmed it, eyes wide. She read it as exploding on X. Within minutes, a 47-second clip of Karoline calmly flipping through the pages, reading her own words with conviction, began to spread like wildfire. The caption, Karoline Leavitt brought the whole email, and receipts. On Reddit, users debated the ethics of media editing. On Instagram, creators stitched her answer with captions like, she handled it better than 99% of politicians would. The internet wasn't unanimously on her side, but she had done something rare. She earned respect from people who expected to hate her. Meanwhile, back on the set, Behar tried to reclaim control. Well, I guess that's your version of events. Karoline turned to her calmly. No. That's the version you showed one line of. I showed all of them. Joy inhaled deeply, visibly rattled. Well, let our viewers decide. Karoline nodded, eyes steady. They already are. The co-host sat quietly, not defeated, just unsure. The segment wrapped, the closing theme played. Polite applause echoed in the studio. Karoline stood, shook hands with the panel and the producer, and walked off the stage with her folder tucked tightly under her arm. Outside the studio doors, the hallway buzzed. Staffers who didn't speak earlier gave her nods of acknowledgement. One camera operator whispered, "That was gutsy." She said nothing, just walked back into the green room. Her phone was vibrating. Non-stop, texts, missed calls, thousands of mentions. Emma had sent a single message. You didn't survive the trap. You owned it. Karoline exhaled for the first time in hours. This wasn't damage control. This was a turning point. And it had just gone national. By the time Karoline's SUV pulled up to the West Wing entrance, the internet had already crowned her moment. The 47-second clip of her calmly flipping through pages on The View, reading, clarifying, dismantling, was approaching 5 million views across platforms. But it wasn't the numbers that stood out. It was the tone. This wasn't rage bait or partisan spin. It was control, precision, calm fire. Inside the White House, staff gathered around screens, their eyes locked on replays and reaction threads. Aides who'd previously viewed Karoline as just the press secretary now spoke with reverence. She went in with nothing but a folder, one advisor said, and walked out with the room. She didn't just survive, another muttered. She inverted the ambush. In her office, Karoline set the now iconic folder on her desk and glanced at her phone. Messages were flooding in, not just from Trump world allies, but from surprising sources, neutral journalists, liberal professors, even foreign press. Then her desk phone rang. Caller ID, Trump, private. She picked up, her voice steady. Mr. President. Trump's voice came through, firm but pleased. Karoline, that was genius. You didn't just defend yourself, you exposed them. That was big league. Karoline replied without ego. It was just the truth, sir. I let their own framing collapse under its weight. Trump chuckled, clearly impressed. You made Behar look like she was reading tabloids. And you didn't even flinch. You're not just a press secretary, you're a weapon. The call ended. Karoline leaned back in her chair, her silver cross necklace, catching a beam of sunlight through the window. It wasn't about Trump, or Joy, or the email. It was about truth. And who had the nerve to carry it into fire? Back in the press briefing room, journalists were behaving differently. The usual posturing, smirks, and gotcha questions were gone. They looked at her with a new kind of tension. One reporter asked softly, "Off the record, how long have you been planning that?" Karoline replied without hesitation, "I didn't plan anything. I just refused to run." Over the next 24 hours, headlines rolled like waves. Karoline flips this narrative, one page at a time. Not a victim, not a fighter, a reader of facts. The calm that shook daytime TV. And then, the twist no one expected. A liberal columnist from The Atlantic tweeted, "I disagree with her politics, but Karoline Leavitt just did what half of Washington won't. Show up, read her words, and let people judge for themselves." It worked. Didn't make her a hero to everyone, but it made her impossible to ignore. It arrived in an unmarked envelope. No name, no return address, just a thick beige parcel left on Karoline's desk late in the evening, hours after she had wrapped up press briefings for the day. At first, she assumed it was another media request, another letter of either praise or protest. But when she tore it open and saw the words printed on the first page, bold, centered, and unmistakably deliberate, her eyes narrowed. This is what real truth looks like. Inside were copies, uncensored, time-stamped, and damning, of internal emails, real ones, from within ABC's media consultancy team. There were notes from producers, strategy memos, and, most strikingly, a transcript from a planning call a day before The View aired the clipped email. One line was highlighted in yellow. "We know the quote is incomplete, but it's perfect for air. Push it hard. If she responds, we'll pivot to tone or blame staffers. Either way, we get the narrative out first." Karoline sat in silence, letting the weight of that sentence settle. This wasn't just political gamesmanship. This was premeditated character assassination disguised as a morning talk show. Emma entered the room seconds later, eyes catching the scattered pages. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Karoline turned the paper toward her. They knew it was incomplete. They aired it anyway. Emma stared, stunned. "They played America." Karoline replied, "No, they tried to. But we showed up with the ending they never planned for." For the next few hours, Karoline and her team reviewed every page, cross-referencing dates, validating authenticity. Everything held up. The next morning, she authorized a formal request, not for a retraction, but for an on-air correction. Not just a tweet, not just a press release. A correction delivered live on the same stage where the narrative began. Social media exploded again, this time not just with support, but with outrage. ABC knew it was cropped. How many stories have been edited like this? If Karoline hadn't gone on, we'd never have known. A TikTok compilation titled, "She Didn't Clap Back, She Read the Whole Thing," hit 15 million views in 2 days. Influencers across the political spectrum dissected her appearance, not for drama, but as a masterclass in grace under fire. A Columbia journalism professor tweeted, "What Karoline Leavitt did on national TV wasn't a stunt, it was accountability. She brought documents, context, and composure. That's the standard now." Even harsh critics admitted, however grudgingly, that Karoline had exposed something deeper than a smear campaign. She had exposed a system, one built not on truth, but on the illusion of it. 1 week after The View, Karoline stood behind the White House podium. The press corps was unusually restrained, not silent, but respectful in a way she hadn't seen since taking office. A reporter from Reuters raised her hand. "Miss Leavitt, do you think this moment has changed how the public views political media?" Karoline paused, then answered with quiet clarity, "I don't know if it changed their view, but I hope it reminded them to look beyond what they're told and to finish the sentence." There it was again, that line, the one she had posted on X just days before, the one that had now appeared on posters in classrooms, on T-shirts, and even across protest signs held by people who didn't even vote for her. "If you're going to accuse someone, finish the sentence." It had stopped being just a comeback. It had become a challenge. That night, Karoline returned to her office, where a framed copy of that tweet now hung beside the original View headline, "Leavitt, controlling the truth." Underneath, in fine print, she'd scribbled with a gold pen, or just reading all of it. On her desk was another letter, this time from a college freshman in Michigan who had stayed up rewatching her entire View appearance for a class on political communication. "You didn't yell. You didn't attack. You just read. And somehow that hit harder than anything else I've seen. It made me think, not about politics, but about truth." Karoline leaned back, letting the words sink in. She hadn't set out to inspire. She hadn't crafted sound bites in advance. She had just shown up. And that was the power. In an era where noise rules, she had found a way to make silence sharp. Where most enter media battles armed with insults and applause lines, she'd entered with a folder and left with something more: credibility. Later that week, Joy Behar returned to The View after a brief hiatus. She mentioned Karoline only once, quickly, lightly, and with a dismissive shrug. But the audience's response had changed. A few clapped, a few didn't. Because no matter what was said now, they had seen what happened. They had watched Karoline read every word. Not for performance, not for spin, but for clarity. And in doing so, she hadn't just rewritten a narrative. She had rewritten the rules, not by shouting over the noise, but by finishing the sentence and letting it speak for itself. In today's media circus, most people shout to be heard. But Karoline Leavitt did something else. She walked into the lion's den, sat down, and started reading. No yelling, no drama, just truth, uncut and unafraid. While Joy Behar waved a single sentence like a weapon, Karoline brought the full email. Every word, every context, every fact. And in doing so, she exposed something far bigger than a television smear. She exposed how easily a half-truth becomes a whole lie. She didn't flinch. She didn't fold. She faced the trap and turned. It inside out, live on national television. Because in a world where everyone edits clips, spins, and distorts, Karoline reminded America of the power in simply finishing the sentence. This wasn't just a win for her. It was a masterclass in calm confrontation, a turning point in political media, and a reminder to every viewer. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that changes everything.